What does it look like when God works powerfully, not on mountaintops, but in homes, hunger, crisis, and even war? When his power shows up in the ordinary and the desperate, the question is, will you recognize him? Welcome, dear friends, to Under the Work, where we daily read the scriptures and wrestle with the scriptures, not merely for information, but for formation. So today, the readings for today brings us to 2 Kings chapter 4 through 7, and then Psalm 102. So let's jump in chapter 4, right? So we read here Elisha's ministry expands, demonstrating God's active presence among his people during a time of national apostasy, when the nation has just rejected him and moved away from him. And here we see the repeated theme, right? So a provision which reflects that God's covenant faithfulness, that his sustaining care for his people is not determined or based upon people's behaviors, but is all fully dependent upon his faithfulness. Here are the stories in chapter 4. So we read about the widow's oil, which multiplies, right? So, and we'll talk about this when we get to the loaves and fishes of what Jesus does, right? So the Shumanite woman receives a son, right? So the son dies and is raised. And we read about the poisonous stew, which is made safe, and we hear about the bread is multiplied. There's just so much richness in this chapter, right? So God's compassion for the vulnerable, we read that God's power over life and death, and we read about God's provision beyond natural means that just defies human logic or reasoning, right? So miracles that cannot be manufactured in a lab. In fact, Davis, from the Word Biblical Commentary here, he emphasizes that these miracles are not spectacle, right? So they're really they are signs of what he calls Yahweh's activities. In other words, the Lord, the covenant, God's activities. So it's about covenant mercy in everyday life, right? So, and again, these, as I can't say it enough, I really feel like these are just anticipating the ministry of Jesus himself, right? So, like Mark chapter 6, where we read about the multiplying miracles, and we read in Luke chapter 7, one of many, and again, so the other chapters capture it as well, that the raising of the dead. You see, Elisha's ministry, dear friends, foreshadows the ministries of Jesus in both power and compassion. And then we move to chapter 5, where we read about Naaman, right? So a Syrian commander, an enemy of Israel, who was healed by about this prophet, like he was this arrogance in him fire. So that God requiring that simple obedience. And so are not, he says, are not Abanan and Fahara, says, better than all the waters of Israel. See, this is really just revealing the pride of this man, right? So which God confronts. God confronts his pride, his arrogance, his ego. See, God's grace, friends, and here we see is that God's grace that extends beyond Israel, foreshadowing what Paul talks about, right? So there's no more male or female, Greek or Gentile, right? So it's free or slave, but through Christ. You see, healing comes. We also see that healing comes through humble obedience, and we see that God opposes pride. So in fact, House here in the New American Commentary, he notes that this passage demonstrates that Yahweh is not a tribal deity. He is Lord over all nations. And that's where we begin to see here the promise that God made to Abraham. Even in the Old Testament, we see God beginning to include other nations into this. We see Gehazi, we see the devastating um, consequence to Gehazi, Elisha's servant, whose greed gets in the way. In fact, his greed contrasts sharply with Naaman's humility, right? Judgment falls on him, showing that proximity to God does not equal faithfulness. And then we move to 2 Kings chapter 6. And so in this we read conflict between Israel and Aram, which continues. And so we also see a key moment in here also where Elisha reveals those who are with us are more than those who are with them. This passage, my friends, in chapter 6 is honestly like one of my favorite scriptures. And these words are one of my favorite scriptures. When Elisha's servant scared of what he sees through the natural, where Elisha reminds him to not be afraid because God's got them. See, the servant's eyes are opened and he sees through his natural eye the invisible spiritual reality. He sees that God's protection of his people. He sees God's mercy toward enemies. See, my dear friends, God blinds the armies as we read this, not to destroy them, but to spare them. This is extremely unexpected. You see, Provan here from the biblical commentary, I'm sorry, understanding biblical commentary. He highlights that this demonstrates divine mercy even in the context of conflict. Later, however, Samaria suffers siege and famine, showing judgment alongside mercy. And then we move to chapter 7, in which we read, right, Samaria is under severe famine, and that Elisha prophesies sudden deliverance. It seems impossible. In fact, a royal officer doubts. And he says to Elisha, if the Lord himself should make windows in heaven. And Elisha prophesies, you will see it, but you will not get to taste it. You will not see it fulfilled. He saw it fulfilled, but you will not be able to be present. See, dear friends, the deliverance is, so it really happens just the way Elisha says it. And then we read about the lepers who during this famine, they're saying like, we're doomed if we stay here, we're doomed if we go in the city. So let's just die trying anyway. And they go into the place and they discover the Armenians have abandoned their plot and they have left everything behind. So they eat until they're filled and they take some of the gold and then their conscience gets the best of them. And then they go and deliver the news to the people of the king of Israel, but the king thought it was conspiracy, did not want to do it. See, the theological themes that we see in this is this, that God reverses impossible situations, that faith receives, yet unbelief misses, and that salvation often comes through unexpected means. In fact, the New American Commentary House here notes that this chapter highlights that God's salvation is both gracious and sovereign. It is unearned and unstoppable. And then we move to a reading from Psalm 102, which is about a psalm of lament from deep suffering. The psalm contrasts human frailty with God's eternal nature. The psalmist says, you are the same and your years have no end. Praise God. And this is said of, and the writer of the Hebrews says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. Unchanging, ever constant, ever present. See, here in this, you are the same and your years never have no end. In the Hebrew, it emphasizes what theologians call immutability. In other words, the inability to ever be able to change. God is immutable, that he does not change throughout time and history. When kings come and kings go, generations rise and generations go, He remains constant, never changing. So the theological theme in this chapter is this, that honest lament before God. There's nothing hidden from God, but God calls us to honestly lament before Him. That we see that God is the only one that has eternal nature, that hope beyond suffering, present suffering. So in fact, that tells us in I believe it's in Romans chapter 8. It says our current sufferings are nothing in comparison to the glory that awaits us. In fact, here Goldegate from the Baker's commentary of Wisdom and Psalms, he notes that this psalm holds together deep anguish and unshakable theological confidence. See, dear friends, this psalm is later applied to Christ in Hebrew chapter 1, identifying him as the eternal creator. So put together then all of the readings from Second Kings and the Psalm, these chapters reveal a powerful and unified truth that God is actively present, working in power, in mercy, and sovereignty, even in broken and ordinary circumstances. See, our readings from 2 Kings chapter 4, he provides and he restores. Chapter 5, he extends grace to outsiders. Chapter 6, he reveals unseen reality. In chapter 7, he delivers the helpless. And then in Psalm 102, he remains eternal and eternal amid, eternal in the midst of, eternal through human suffering. Together, I believe they reveal four things to us: that God's compassion, that God's power, God's global purpose, and that God's unchanging, what is called immutable nature. All of this, then, I believe wholeheartedly points to one person, Jesus Christ, the healer of the outsider, the provider of life, the revealer of spiritual truth, the eternal Son who does not change and forever is the same. So, my dear friends, as I close, I want to beg of us, let us not overlook, God because his work seems ordinary. I beg of us, let us not resist him because his ways may seem simple. Let us not lose hope when circumstances feel overwhelming. See, dear friends, God is working even when unseen. Humble yourself like Naaman. Trust his word even when it seems impossible. Bring your sufferings honestly before him. A beg of us, let us fix our eyes on the author and perfecter of our faith, Jesus Christ, who is the same yesterday, today, and will be forevermore. My dear friends, as always, I want to encourage us, let us stay under the word. And also want to encourage you to continue to come back to the word so that God can continue to reveal himself to us. As always, I want to thank you for watching this video and for spending part of your day with me. And if this video has been helpful, I encourage you to share with friends, encourage them to join us. If you have not subscribed to our church's YouTube channel, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button and follow us and come back again to be under the word. God bless you, and I'll see you again under the word.